Welcome to another episode of the Self Storage Insight Podcast. Today, I'm joined by Ben Gottfredson of Big Ben's Moving and Storage and Big Storage Ventures, and we're going to discuss his transition from a moving business into the storage industry. Ben, if you don't mind, give us a little bit of a background on yourself and kind of how you got started.
Thanks for having me on. My name's Ben Gottfredson. I own Big Ben's Moving and Storage and Big Storage Ventures. And how I got into storage, so I started with a moving company that I live in an area where there's a lot of growth and real estate transactions. So I just found myself in this service business that turned out to be pretty lucrative. You just have to do a good job for people and they keep calling.
Okay.
And so going through college, I was playing football at a small university called Dixie State University. And I didn't have time to hold down a job, so that's what I did. And at the same time, I fell in love with real estate. I would buy rental properties, and I lived in the first one, and I rented out the other rooms to 8 guys. So it was like 9 guys in a 3-story house.
Nice.
And then I refinance it a year later and take out $100,000 on a couple properties, and I'm falling in love with real estate, right? At the same time as I have all these customers calling me for my moving company saying, hey, I'd love to hire you for moving, and can you store my stuff as well? And so I realized I had a lot of lead generation happening for storage facilities that I just had to pass off. So my first deal was here in St. George, where I grew up, where I live, and I kind of just had to bootstrap that one. Like I saved up cash just for my moving company to buy some land just in cash. Mm-hmm. But then I still had to get the loan. And I think, as your audience knows, like one of the biggest barriers of entry is the banks, right? And so for a first timer, I had to be persistent. Like I had to go from bank to bank to bank. I went to a dozen banks, and finally I went to this small town bank, and I went to there's 3 branches in town, and finally the third banker, he gave me the loan. So that I had already been rejected by other people at the same bank, and he finally let me into my first deal.
So as far as kind of moving in then from moving to storage, I'm assuming then you ended up building that first facility, correct, with the land that you had purchased. If you don't mind filling us in a little bit on like kind of what was that process like from closing on the deal with the bank to getting your first customer to move in?
Well, to be honest, I got pretty fortunate. Like a couple things that worked out. It's a 2-acre facility. It has a good unit mix. I learned a lot. I call it my guinea pig, but it has a good mix of, climate controlled, enclosed RV, drive up. And it was a process. You learn that you have to push construction along. One thing that I feel really fortunate is it didn't go over budget. I think it went a little bit over on timeline. Like you can't really trust the timeline. So now we account for a longer timeline. Mm-hmm. And I think I knew, and this was the problem was with putting it through with the banks, was I knew what I could charge and I knew how fast I would lease up, but I had to underwrite like a 3-year window. Yeah. But the cool part was, and this is not something I want everyone to plan on, and I don't plan on this for every facility, but we started putting tenants in units as soon as they were built. So like before we even had the CO, before we even had the loan closed, like I was putting tenants in units. And by the time we closed the loan, we had enough income coming in that we were never cash negative for 1 month on that. Wow. Yeah. And I don't say it like a brag, like it's because it was small. It's because I already had the leads coming in. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of the story of the first one.
What year was that you built that in, if you don't mind?
That was 2019.
Okay. So you got in right before like the whole COVID materials rush and everything was.
The timing was lucky. The timing was blessed, right? Like there's no There's no way around it.
Right.
It was if I would have started, in 2022 and had to fill up in 2023, I think I would have been okay, but I probably wouldn't have been cash positive right out the gate.
Right, for sure. Now, is there anything that you can remember specifically as far as like a pain point as you grew out of just moving and into both moving and storage operationally, or anything like that that you can think of?
We're still trying to build out our infrastructure, right? So we're scaling. So like now we've done 4 more properties, and we have our moving side is scaling as well. So we've gone from, okay, should we have separate people answer the phones for moving and storage? Should we have it be the same person and leverage economies of scale?
Right.
So we kind of classify these tasks at our storage facility into proactive in person, proactive remote, and then proactive or reactive in person and reactive remote. And
Okay.
so we're still massaging it. And I wouldn't call it a pain point, but really just an opportunity to figure out the most efficient way to kind of leverage both of these businesses at once. And you have to do the same thing even without a moving company. You have to decide what you're going to pay people. Are you going to try to do a call center? Are you going to try to have someone at every site, right? A lot of these
Right.
issues come up.
And yeah, and what they say, right? Moving is good for storage. Moving is good for moving too. So you kind of just, it's a really good fit, it seems like, as far as to have both of those businesses at the same time.
Yes, I think it's been a tremendous, benefit. I think I don't want people just to tune out and say, "Oh, well, you have a moving company. That's an advantage I'll never have," right? Because there's other ways you can do it, right? We were just talking yesterday on a coaching call and basically talking about U-Haul, right? And so because I have a moving company, I've had like a conflict of interest with U-Haul for a little while where they
Mhm.
they were hesitant to trust me to do U-Hauls out of my storage facilities. But just this last month, we convinced them to let us put U-Haul in.
Okay.
And there is some downside because you have people that some attention will be taken off your storage operation.
Right.
But I think as far as lead generation, U-Haul and moving clients, they'll pay more than what we call like core occupants who they just want the storage unit for forever, like an extra garage.
Right.
Those people pay less than people who are only planning on being in there for less than 12 months because they're moving.
Right.
So there's other things you can do besides start a moving company to get creative on driving traffic to your facility.
Right. And you compare them together too, as far as, I know we had spoke the other day when I talked to you on the phone about bundling and stuff, but at the same time,
Yes.
you can generate leads online. There's a lot of ways that you can get creative to lease up and fill up your facility. If you don't mind, we'll kind of switch towards acquisitions a little bit at this point. And so you built your first facility in 2019. And then since then you've acquired 4 more properties, correct? As far as over the last few years?
Yep, we have four more in various stages of stabilization. The second deal is a conversion that we bought in Provo that is still going on,
Okay.
and I've learned a lot about conversions. Maybe we can dive into that.
Yeah, for
Then
sure.
we have an acquisition in Salt Lake that's been a really exciting one already, and that's actually a cool story because with that one, we actually had to put $0 down on that
Oh,
one
wow.
because what happened uh, that we got it from a wholesaler, and the wholesaler they actually they're nice guys, but legally they did a few no-nos. So
Okay.
to avoid, so they introduced us to the seller, and to avoid a lawsuit, the wholesaler backed out and basically just introduced us to the seller, and we had some legal things on the seller, and it was kind of messy. So we
Hmm.
just sat down with the seller and said, look, like we have been putting a lot of resources into this deal. What can we do here? They owned it free and clear, and they were happy. So basically, what we did was we let them retain some ownership, but we let them retain enough ownership that the bank would basically just let us take out a loan with $0 down.
So speaking on those acquisition types, right? With the conversion, when you're
Yeah.
looking for a conversion facility, right? What are you kind of looking at as you go into that deal as far as projecting out, future revenues, how much work
Yeah.
goes into that side of it?
Well, I'll tell you what, I'm this conversion that we did has probably been our hairiest deal, to be honest, right? So I would say I would be more hesitant to do conversions again versus just regular new construction or acquisitions,
Right.
because I think people like the advantage to an acquisition is you can creatively get in a market, right? You can get a location that maybe other traditional storage buyers and builders aren't thinking about, right? And
Right.
so that's the advantage of a conversion, but there's a lot more surprises, right? Because
Mm.
even with ground up and acquisitions, you're always going to have some value add with an acquisition, but the amount of surprises that come with a conversion are just through the roof, right? You didn't know that there would be, this problem with the roof, or that you'd have to fill in this loading dock, or that you'd have to be this far away from the power lines and there's already existing buildings there, right?
Right.
So I guess my advice would be you have some advantages because your construction costs on just a plain blank slate warehouse go down when you do a conversion,
Hmm.
but there's also more dangers hiding behind the curtain too.
So out of the acquisitions that you've done, as far as the due diligence that you do
Yeah.
before you purchase a facility, how has that kind of changed from your first one to your last one? What are some things that you learned that you really want to dive into before you commit to that purchase?
For me, I'm looking more into the books, right? Like
Mhm.
I think a lot of times with other, like some for a conversion or an acquisition, like you look at the roof, you look at the big expenses that could come up, but
Right.
I spend a lot of my attention looking at like, okay, what are they hiding on the books? What expenses are they hiding on the books? What are they stretching, right? Like for example, one of the big no-nos that we talk about is like paying, like if someone has a revenue line for U-Hauls, I just brought
Right.
up U-Hauls, but
Right.
you can't pay on a cap rate. You have to pay like on a business for that revenue line, right? And
Right.
so um, it depends on how strong the deal is, because on this last deal we did, it was our best deal yet, and it was so strong. I basically did a very like I put 10 grand down hard immediately, even with like even before due diligence,
Okay.
because it was such a strong deal. But I'll tell you, like other deals that we've done, I've asked for 90 days and got it. And then I even asked for another 30 days, and I was like, okay, I'll pay you, 5 grand earnest money if you let me extend, or I'll back out, and
Right.
the sellers ended up cooperating, taking that extra earnest money, and we still did the deal. And I'm still actually that deal is looking better and better all the time, but it wasn't as clear, right? We needed like
Mm.
3 or 4 months to really vet the deal.
And some of those good deals, when you find them like that, it's more just take it or leave it. You don't really get to negotiate a whole lot of stuff because somebody else is going to come in there with a better offer. So, yeah, as
Yeah.
far as like the things that I've seen and to other people I've talked to, it's usually, try to get 90 days if you can. But obviously, that's usually best case scenario. And a lot of people don't work with you that well on it. But so I was just kind of curious your experience as far as what you shoot for. And
Yeah, and I think backing out of a deal is really healthy, right? Like I think it's a good practice for someone getting in the game
Mhm.
to, if you're not 100% certain on the first deal you get under contract, practice backing out just to prove to yourself, hey, I'm capable of getting a deal under contract, vetting it, and backing out. It's a good practice.
As far as so for somebody maybe newer looking to get their first facility or new to storage, what would be your kind of the advantages to buying a value add versus building your first facility, which you built your first facility, right? So kind of what is kind of the pros and cons to that comparison?
Building is an easier way to get in, right? Just finding a spot. But I would say acquisitions are better. Um, Acquisitions, if you can buy a facility with occupancy, your turnaround is just so much faster, right?
Mhm.
Now, I tell this to my because we do syndications, so we bring on partners looking for all sorts of different deals, right? And I
Okay.
I tell them, hey, like I want to pair you up with the best asset for you. And so if you're looking for, we have people that we'll take on people that they're only putting in $100,000, and that $100,000 means everything to them. Like
Mhm.
they need to see a return like within a quarter. And I'll
Right.
just tell them, okay, look, like if you need to see a return soon, we got to wait till we get another acquisition. But we have people, we're working with a $350 million company. They're just like, we want to build wealth, period. And so they're the ones that we're doing our new construction projects on, because they can take more of like a 10-year horizon and see all the millions in equity they're going to build on
Right.
top of
Sure.
the cash flow.
Yeah.
So I think it depends on your goal, your horizon. I know that acquisitions are much safer. There's less risk, but I do think that I don't see a problem with mixing in. I would say our goal, just we wrote this down. We want to be about 80% acquisitions and 20% new developments. And we don't want to go over 20% new developments, just to
Okay.
kind of diversify.
Very interesting too, as far as so with the facilities that you have and the one that's under new construction now,
Yeah.
how long has that construction process been going on? I didn't know when you were planning to start leasing up, or how long is a newer facility taking you to build?
This one has, okay, so I'll tell you both, right? And I'll kind of tie in conversions, right? So I want to bring this up too. The plans for the architect and the engineers, they're so much more difficult and expensive on a conversion than a new build. So that's something that people
Okay.
need to know. So this deal we bought a year ago, this conversion, the plans are taking such a long time
Mhm.
that this new construction we bought, just a couple months ago, it's looking like these two projects are going to finish up about the same time.
Oh, wow.
So we're adding approximately 9 months longer to do a conversion project, just because of the prep work and the architecture,
Mhm.
as compared to a construction deal. So we anticipate that in our deal with our partners, we have basically a 14-month uh, guideline, where if we can get this built and get the first tenant in 14 months, we hit basically a mark that we get a bigger piece of the pie.
Okay.
Where if it takes us longer than 14 months for this new construction project, then we don't get that, right? So we believe truly that we'll have everything ready to go to break ground this spring and be done this summer, so we can meet that window.
Okay.
I think 14 months is really good, like a good safe, like if it's a new construction, that's a
Mhm.
safe goal. Where, yeah, I'd be looking at closer to 23 months on a conversion.
Yeah, that's crazy that it's that big of a difference. Because looking at it from just if I'm outside the industry looking in, it seems like it'd be faster to do a conversion than a new construction if the structures are in place and all you're doing is partitioning off buildings and things. But you can get into a lot of stuff. I was working with a guy locally where I was working on his floor plan and stuff as far as the layout. He had bought an old restaurant, was making it climate controlled units. And
Nice.
so he also has a moving company, which is kind of interesting as far as he's kind of doing the two part, moving and storage. But just even walking through the building and seeing the way that the structure's laid out, and you know you're looking at removing partitions, and so you have to have an engineer come in with a commercial building and see what's load bearing, and how do you support being. There's just a lot of things that go into where really quickly, if you don't know what you're doing, you'll get in over your head with a conversion, it feels like.
Yes. And since I have to clarify, this conversion, this one I've been referring to, is a big, hairy conversion. It's gonna be a 10 million plus project after it's all said and done, which is it's good. Like it's gonna be worth so much someday. But we have another smaller, this acquisition, our most recent one, has a 5,000 square foot warehouse, and we're just going to put 40 climate controlled units in it, and so it's going to be a small scale conversion.
Mhm.
And that is going to be so much easier, cheaper, faster. Like
Right.
when you just have one flat warehouse, it's so much different. We have these two warehouses, and there's loading docks and drainage things, and
Hmm.
there's like cement lips, and there's so
Right.
many surprises.
Yeah.
So not all conversions are created equal.
This episode of the Self Storage Insight podcast was brought to you by CC Storage. Are you a self storage facility owner or operator and you're frustrated with your current property management software? You are not alone. We hear complaints like this all the time. Our fees keep increasing. Our support is terrible and we can't get a hold of anyone. So, CC Storage developed a software that allows your customers the ability to sign up online for units, as well as access to a tenant portal where they can make payments online, manage things like auto pay, and a whole bunch of other cool features. The coolest one is that they can do all of this at no cost to your business. If this sounds like something you'd be interested in, check out the link in the description below or head on over to ccstorage.com to learn more. Now back to the podcast. So just to kind of shift gears a little bit, I like to always ask people whenever I talk to them, have you ever had any horror stories within self-storage or anything crazy that's happened to you out of the norm that you'd like to share?
Oh man, we have funny stuff all the time. I mean, one of my strategies is to keep prices high, so I keep out a lot of the riffraff, right? Like I keep out a
Mhm.
lot of those druggies and defaulting tenants.
Right.
But yeah, we do catch people on our cameras at like 3 a.m. doing weird stuff, and we have to address it. I live in a really safe part of the country, but
Mhm.
we just bought a facility in the inner city. And
Okay.
so it's been a crazy learning experience because these, criminals, they just freaking smell the vulnerability, right? Like we're doing this project where we're tearing down an office and a living quarters, and we're going to make it rentable space, but we have to take down the gate for like 2 weeks, right?
Okay.
People like criminals catch on to it, and they don't even, who tells them that the gate's down and they have like a chance to go like cause trouble, right? And so we do have those. When you're flipping a facility and you're raising everybody's rate substantially,
Hmm.
and you have to, like, you have so many sad sob stories. Like we had this lady, and she calls in, and she got her rent raised, and she's blind, and her unit's full of braille, and it's like, we just have to say like, oh my gosh, like
Yeah.
what? We feel so bad. We feel so bad, but we're not changing our rent
Right.
policy. And we get
Yeah.
stuff like that. We had one where we pull up to the facility, and there was a cop there arresting our tenant right in front of us, and
Nice.
left the wife there, crying in a puddle of tears, and we raised their rent 300% because we had just taken over the facilities. So
That's a bad day for them.
the list goes on, but
Right.
it's a people think it's boring. It's very exciting.
Yeah, it's interesting as far as you brought up raising rates, which is one of the next things I was kind of wanting to talk to you a little bit about. If you are getting into storage, you're going to need to raise rates. So if you
Yeah.
aren't comfortable with having that conversation with customers, right, it's probably not the industry to get into, because even with your value adds and stuff, if you're buying a mom and pop location, you're going to want to raise rates and to stay competitive with what everybody else is doing. And so with your new build or your new facilities that you've built with the lease up process, what is kind of your strategy there as far as the introductory rate, the street rate, right, versus the in-place rate?
Yeah, good question. So we just bought this one, and I want to talk about this because people have to raise rates, right? And we just bought this facility where the gross income was like 22,000, and we got the deal on seller financing, and our monthly payment to him was going to be 34,000, right? So we knew that we would have to go in and raise rates, and this is a facility that's a unicorn. Like it's kind of a monopoly where it's the only facility in the city, and it's a really snooty town where they're never going to let more storage be built.
Okay.
And the tenants have been getting, so far below market. So we went in, and we had to triple everybody's rent day one, right?
Okay.
And I had this guy call me, and he's a friend of mine. I didn't know he was a tenant in there. And he called me, and he's like, "Hey, I just had a heart attack. I was like, are you okay? Like, can I help you? And he's like, you tripled my rent. So, I just had to tell him, like, look, we didn't do anything mean. You've been getting a discount for a long time. And for us to service the debt, we had to do this. Like this facility has been 100% full for decades. And
Right.
so we literally had to come in. We had no choice for us to service the debt. And now we're cash flowing already month one. So one thing I'll do is I'll put down extra earnest money. We put down an extra $100,000 of earnest money so we could take over operations before we closed, because
Okay.
we were going to have to put that money down anyways to get the deal. But
Right.
we wanted to just jump in there and start raising people's rates before we even owned it.
Okay.
So we're pretty aggressive. You do have to peel back. I think the next 2 quarters are going to be pretty tough. So, once you get people out, then you got to drop street rates again to get new people back in, right?
Right.
And I do know that whenever, especially the next, let's say 6 months, right? Whenever new people are coming in the market, you have to, right before they open their doors, you have to raise rent, right? So you get people at as high as you feel like you possibly can.
Mhm.
And then once they open their doors, you know that for them to lease up, they're going to have low prices. So you bring your street rates back down again so
Mhm.
that you can match theirs and compete for those new tenants, right?
Right.
So that's kind of a strategy that we're going to be employing over the next 6 months.
I feel like there's a lot more strategy involved in it than people think.
Yeah,
Oh, like everybody's in towns paying the same rate if you have a storage facility. That's just not the case. And so
yeah.
yeah, it's very interesting. What was your turnover like? So whenever you raised the rates 300%, how many people moved out? Was it close to the 30%, or did it significantly increase because of that first big increase that they hadn't seen in a long time?
25% moved out. So we
Okay.
we went from 100%, literally 100% to 75%, but everybody else stayed.
Hmm.
Everybody else sucked it up, and because the thing is, I have another facility in the same town where we're charging more for smaller units, right? So it wasn't like I say 300%, and it's not like they had anywhere to go. So that 25% that left, they just quit storage. They just said, for me to move my stuff back in my garage. They didn't have another
Right.
place to go for cheaper. That's kind
Mhm.
of, why we were so confident doing it.
Yeah, and that might not be the case, obviously, with every location, because some places they would have somewhere else to go, and you'd probably lose a significantly more amount. However, the game doesn't really change, right? You still do that increase. You just lose a
Yeah.
higher percentage, and then you lease up more, you lower rates more to get them in the door, and then you do it again and again until you can sit at a higher occupancy rate. So it's very interesting to hear everybody's strategy on how they plan to lease up new facilities, or as well as acquisitions as they're trying to increase the value per unit. Is there any like one piece of information you'd want to give to possibly somebody looking to get started in storage? Like, they're looking to acquire a facility. What's the one thing that you would tell them, maybe as just, one good piece of advice?
Well, this might be more like general real estate advice is almost think of it more like a business, right? People think that every piece of real estate is going to be so passive.
Mhm.
And so for me, like I have Airbnb, I have these houses I rent out by the room, I have storage facilities, and it became as much work for me to rent out my, single family homes as it did to build out a storage property management company.
Mhm.
So a lot of people say diversify, and I think you can diversify enough within an asset class. So I guess my advice would be, when you buy your first storage facility, unless you really are just gonna, like, you're the type of person that's gonna live there and this is just your new job and that's what you want, I
Mhm.
would say don't think that it's just gonna be passive. Anticipate, have enough meat on the bone for that deal to build out a property management company so that it can be passive, because it's not if you don't build it out.
Yeah, and I think too, like just with the landscape of storage, it's going to change a lot over the next few years. I mean, even in our area, the facilities going in are significantly nicer.
Yeah.
The mom and pop shops are getting fewer and farther between as big companies buy them up and then renovate them, so you're going to have to be somewhat aggressive, I think, in the next 10 years to keep that asset profitable, right? Versus just buying a facility and saying, oh, we're 100% occupancy, we're going to keep the rate at $60 so nobody moves out. Like that game is going to change, and that I'm excited to kind of see what it looks like.
Yep, it's fun. I feel like we still got it in time because, in 30 years, this will probably be a very consolidated, maybe shorter amount of time, who knows, but this will be way consolidated, just like, apartments are and other types of real estate. So
Right.
if you're in the storage game, it might feel like competition's tough and it's already consolidated and it's hard to get in a deal, but it's just going to get worse. So just enjoy the next decade or two while we still can.
Get as many as you can before time runs out. No. This podcast episode was brought to you by CC Storage. CC Storage is a property management software that helps you pass the fees of credit card processing onto your customers so you don't pay credit card processing fees ever again. If you enjoyed the podcast, there's a link below where you can fill out a form and be interviewed on the podcast with myself. If that interests you, please click the link below and we'll be in touch. We hope you enjoyed this podcast episode. Don't forget to check back next week for another interview with another self-storage property owner.